Hello, everybody, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Hello, I'm Listening with me, your main host, Danny, and co-host, Voifi.
You mean your main host?
No,
Voifi?
Main host, Danny.
Dr. Wolfgang. Dr. Wolfgang.
If anything, I'm closer to being a doctor than you are.
Not really.
Actually
You're maybe
true.
closer to a medical doctor.
Medical doctor.
Yeah.
The most
But
important
I'm
kind of
technically
doctor.
closer to like a PhD candidate.
Yeah, but doctor, come on.
Doctor is a doctor.
Yeah, but people who walk around like, I'm a doctor, and they have like a PhD in philosophy. It's impressive, but...
I only would like to have a doctor.
So you can be the first doctor in your family?
No. If there's a plane ride and they're like, oh, it's their doctor, and I'm like, yes, I am a doctor. They're like, help us. It's like I'm not that kind of a doctor. So today we have a guest.
We have a great guest today. Oh boy!
That was my
Let's
coaster.
just throw things on the floor, shall we?
We have a great guest today. I don't want to give too much away, but she's a sexual abuse survivor. And she has
a really inspiring story.
Yeah, and she comes to us from California, San Diego.
A whale's vagina.
That's a joke.
That's an Anchorman joke.
Yeah, for all those people who have never seen Anchorman.
If all those people who have never seen Anchorman, then what are you doing? Go turn this podcast. Pause the podcast. Don't try to pause it. Go watch Anchorman.
Actually listen to the podcast, then
then
subscribe,
watch Anchorman.
Then follow the podcast, and then share the podcast, and then watch Anchorman.
And tag us in like a post about Anchorman, so we know that you watched it.
Yeah. No, but So let's just dive in. Yeah, welcome, Rebecca, and thank you for being here with us.
Good morning. Thank you so much. It's great to talk to both of you.
Maybe just give us like a few facts about yourself, who you are, what you're doing, and so that people get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I'm sitting in San Diego, California, and I grew up in the States in California, and spent a lot of years in marketing, film, and TV, and I'm a survivor of early childhood sexual trauma. And recently I self-published a couple of books one is a memoir about surviving trauma and also healing. I think more importantly, healing from all of that. And I'm busy with writing more books now, and looking forward to speaking more about trauma and not just surviving, because I think surviving, for me, it sounds like your trauma is still kind of has its hands all over you, and it's pulling you back, but moving onward from your trauma and your surviving into thriving. So that's my journey today.
Wow, that's I think everybody has a little bit of trauma in their life, but obviously not to the same extent. I had an issue with losing my fingers on my right hand, and I had to deal with that the last couple of years, and trauma is something that usually manifests itself over the years and sometimes comes years later. Maybe talk a little bit about that. How did the trauma of you surviving manifest itself, and how did you start recognizing what it was?
Yeah, so I just want to give context. I was sexually assaulted by my maternal grandfather from the age of 5 to the age of 13. Wow. And during that time, I didn't say anything to anyone, and I don't think it's unusual. I think that it's just, you kind of, you shut down and you go into a different place in your head. And I noticed when I was a teenager in high school, I was about 15, I think, that I started to hear voices in my head, and they were distinct. They weren't, so I later found out that those were personalities, and I had developed multiple personality disorder, which is now called Dissociative Identity Disorder. And those personalities reflected particular ages where I can't say the most severe trauma occurred, but they kind of enveloped a moment in time. And I called them 5, 6, 7, and 13. And 5 was my fear. She was, imagine, 5 years old and being assaulted. 6 was my shame. I didn't get to know her until much later in my healing process. 7 was my sadness. In addition to the sexual abuse that was ongoing, my parents divorced around that age. So, trauma compounds. It just gets bigger. So, and then 13 was my anger. And I was 13 years old when I fought my grandfather off and the abuse ended. And so all of those voices started to manifest in my head, and they were absolutely distinct, and they had their own personalities, and they would literally take over in the sense that if I was feeling fearful, I felt like a childlike fear, not let's say a 17-year-old version of fear. By far, 13, my anger was the most pernicious, and she was the most active in my life day to day. I woke up as 13. I lived my life as 13. And that just, what that looked like is that every response I had was through the lens of anger. So if I felt like someone in high school, if I was jealous of them, for example, they had nicer clothes or whatever, those feelings would get kind of warped into anger, and I would become a bully towards that person or, so I went through life with all of these noises in my head and not being able to be myself. And then when I was 20, I put myself into therapy because I woke up one day and I said, you know what, if I don't put myself in therapy, I'll probably end up not living much longer. I got into a really dark space. And I went into traditional talk therapy, and this was 1990-ish. So the conversation around trauma and the body keeps the score, all those things had yet to be really discovered, much less, discussed on a global level. So I entered into talk therapy, and it was very helpful. I got some tools, and we talked about a lot. And then the healing journey began from there. So it's been complicated. It's been decades, and it's been complicated.
Wow. I think it's probably not uncommon, especially to have such a trauma at such a young age. It's probably not uncommon to develop something like dissociative identity disorder, right? It's not uncommon, I wouldn't think, because it's in a way probably a coping mechanism. Like how is a young child supposed to be able to understand all of these feelings and what's happening and their own feelings about it, the anger, the confusion, the hurt. And it's probably a very common coping mechanism to, okay, I just have to kind of disappear into this other personality, quotes, to be able to live with it and deal with it.
Yeah, I think dissociation is really common. DID is not common. So for my mind to take it to such an extreme, where I'm actually not my present self very often, and I'm living life through the lens of a different personality, that's pretty unusual. But certainly dissociation is absolutely common. I mean, people disassociate sitting at stop signs, right? And like you lose track as you drive home, and all of a sudden you're in your driveway. That's disassociation on a lower level. So, and I think that it's quite common when you listen to survivors talk about how they were outside of themselves, as they stood in the corner and they watched themselves being assaulted, or a car accident. They can see the car accident happening, and they weren't inside the car when it happened. So it's quite common. It's the fact that my mind, the way I describe it is it broke itself into pieces, and those pieces were living outside of myself. from a very early age. And I think that's probably the big difference.
I can relate on some levels. I am also a sexual assault survivor. Mine was in 2016, and the whole disassociation, I can totally, not to the extent of DID, but just feeling like you are an outsider, seeing yourself do all of, like, live your own life. Like, I saw myself doing all of my daily things, but I wasn't really there after. I was just kind of seeing, okay, this is what this person does in their daily life, but I'm still way back here. Like, what on earth is happening to me? What's wrong with me? I felt so broken and almost unrepairable to an extent. And the process of really being able to overcome trauma and move forward from trauma is a very, very difficult journey.
It's so difficult because and I think that I try to make this point in my book as well, that there's no sliding scale, in my opinion. I'm not a doctor. There's no sliding scale for trauma. So if you have medical trauma versus sexual trauma versus, let's say, you were verbally assaulted as a kid or whatever, in my opinion, your body receives it all at the same level.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important for me. It's always important to point out that I get a lot of people saying, well, my trauma isn't as bad as yours. And it's like, that's not how the body receives it.
Yeah.
It starts in the flesh. Your flesh immediately receives that trauma. It creates a signal to your brain, and your brain does its best to protect you. But even someone, I have memories of, I was in a bar once in Virginia, and a guy grabbed my arm, and I didn't know him. He just grabbed my arm and he wanted to get my attention. And sometimes the memory of how he grabbed my arm is somehow feels as fresh and as shocking as some other stuff that I remember. So, it's trauma feeds on itself. I call it like it's like a disease, and it kind of grows on itself, and it feeds off itself, and if you don't resolve it, it will, I think it builds up to the point where it's literally choking the life out of you.
Yeah. That might be, I don't know if it's a question that can be answered, but so being assaulted by someone from inside your family is, I think, like you're basically surrounded by people you can trust, or you feel you can trust, and you're in this safe haven of your family, but all of a sudden this member of your family does something that completely not only breaks the trust but completely destroys that feeling of being safe, or that feeling of you don't even have to think about trusting the people surrounding you. How did that affect you in your later life? Because I can imagine that having this trust that you basically received by being birthed, destroyed, completely messes with you, I assume.
I love that question. I don't get asked that question very often. So I am happy about that question. What I have learned, and I've learned only recently, this is 2023 is my year to develop trust. So I really like your question. Because I asked I call them healers. That's not their word, it's my word. My healer last year, my somatic healer last year, and my therapist this year. I said, you know what? I said, I think I fundamentally need to understand trust. And my therapist jumped to, well, there's some exercises we can go through to help you build trust. I said, no, you're not understanding. I don't even know what trust means. I said, I stopped trusting at 5. And if I'm honest, probably a little earlier, because my mother is a pretty unstable person. So my environment was not necessarily trustworthy from a pretty young age. And then it got completely shattered when I was quite young. And apparently that age of 5, 6, 7 is when you build the fundamental structure of trust and you learn trust. So I think that I'm just now at 53, just learning and studying what trust is. And I think the worst part about it is that, yeah, that betrayal that comes out of your family, there's a permanent break for me with family, and certainly, with my mom, who admitted to me that she knew her father was a pedophile and she didn't do anything to protect me. So there's just a lot of there's distance in there that I don't think can be resolved. And I think I think it's okay that it's not resolved, but certainly later in my life, because I didn't trust, I didn't have healthy relationships. I didn't have, and I wasn't always a good friend, and I wasn't always great in business because that fundamental layer of trust didn't exist. So for me, everyone has an angle. Well, what do you want from me?
Yeah.
And I'm trying my best right now. This year, my year of learning about trust, I'm trying to learn about it and to learn how to catch myself when I start going into those old patterns of, well, what do you really want? Or what are you really about? Because those aren't helpful. And if I project an absence of trust out, I'm likely to meet people with bad energy coming back into me. Like you kind of create the energy that you attract. And so I'm trying to attract trustworthy energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
It totally does.
Yeah.
What was your inspiration for writing the book that you wrote? Was it more on a personal level? Like, I just want to write this as like my own kind of personal therapy? Or was your intention that it reached more people, that maybe it helps more people? Or was it kind of a combination of the two, or something completely different?
I started writing the book after a medical procedure went badly for me. And I don't think I ever intended to write a book about my abuse until that surgery triggered all of my old trauma. And then I started writing it. I've always been a writer in terms of just writing to help me figure things out and to help me, process my feelings. And I started writing it in 2017, then I put it down and I put it away, and I picked it up last year. And as I started to write, I just knew that it was necessary for me to feel more complete in my healing journey, which sadly will never end, but it certainly gets simpler and clearer as the further I go along. But so at first it started out as, well, I'm just going to write everything down and that's going to be good enough. And then it turned into, no, I'm going to write this first for myself because it's very cathartic to finally flush out all those feelings and all of that. But also I think a big part of me hopes that even if a couple of people read this book, that they understand how trauma bleeds into every aspect of your life. Certainly it did in my life, everything, professional, personal, it all is painted with that brush, and how you can come through the other side of it. And that's really the end of the book is, I hope, hopeful that you can come through it. It's hard. It's really difficult, as all of you know, but you can come through it. So I suppose it started out as a bit of a selfish journey at first, and then it turned into a broader hopefulness that some other people might benefit from hearing the story.
If I may ask, some people, when they get assaulted, feel like a guilt or feel like a sense of, was it my fault, or did I do something wrong, or something similar like that? Was there something like that? Like, did you feel guilt in that aspect, and if so, how did you overcome that?
Yeah, such great questions. I wasn't aware of my shame until last year, which is really unusual. I never blamed myself for the sexual abuse ever. But one night I was writing my book and I said, I should probably Google shame, survivor shame, and just, what is it? And then I started to read more about it and I said, oh, I actually have shame that I wasn't And I wasn't aware that the voice in my head that was saying, you're no good, you're fat, you're whatever, that horrible nagging voice, the you voice was my shame.
Yeah.
I didn't know that for decades. I didn't know that. So what I found interesting is through my somatic process is when I finally met Six, she was a host to my shame. She wasn't my actual shame. She was a host to it. I believe shame kind of like a parasite. It kind of attaches itself to you. And then when I finally reconciled and released these personalities, I was in a somatic session where I confronted shame itself. And I said, why are you hurting me? And shame was like, well, I'm hurt. I have to share it with you. And shame took me back to particular moments during sexual assault. And it turns out that I was ashamed because I thought people could hear or see what was happening to me.
Oh, okay.
And I had to just reassure shame. It sounds kind of strange. Reassure shame through these vignettes playing out in my head that no one can see you and no one can hear you, and it's almost over. And it's, so it's, I think shame is the most pernicious, terrible result of trauma. And I'll say in particular sexual trauma, because I can't speak about other traumas. And everything I've read says that shame never completely goes away.
Yeah.
And that's probably was really hard for me to accept.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is my healer last year, she's like, let's just practice something. And she said, I want you to picture shame as a ball of energy coming at you. I said, okay, I can do this. And she's like, receive the energy, because if you push back on it, it just doubles down, right? Energy will just come back at you if you don't let it pass through you. She's like, receive it, but receive it as a ball of light, and then catch it in your hands, and then push it down and push it away and say no. So I did that for a couple of months, and now I don't hear from shame very often. I don't hear the you voice. So it's shame is really complicated.
Yeah.
I think that's everyone who's experienced some sort of form of sexual assault can probably attest to that shame is one of those, and guilt, those feelings are things that just, as much as you want, that's the thing that you probably want the most to go away from at least from my perspective. I want the most for that to not be part of it. But it's also, like you said, the thing that's probably always to an extent going to be there. And it's about how you cope with it and how you accept that will help you to somehow not fully move on from it, but be able to be at peace with it. But I think it's a very confusing aspect of trauma, because for myself, if I give advice to other people, if people come to me and share their story because I'm so open with my story and they feel, okay, I can talk with this person, I want to open up, they tell me, okay, this shame thing, I feel like I'm at fault, I feel guilty, I feel like my trauma is not as bad as yours because, you went through something so much more horrible than I did, or vice versa. Sometimes I feel that way. And I always am inclined to give the advice, yeah, but you're allowed to feel that, and that's okay, and it's not your fault. You just have to tell yourself it's not your fault, but it's okay that you feel that sometimes, and it's normal to feel that. But I can't take my own advice where I can dish it out and be totally at peace with dishing that out, but then I'm like, oh, like I have days where I'm just like, it was my fault, or I could have done this, and this differently and maybe avoided the situation. And it's this weird cycle of guilt and shame that doesn't seem to stop.
Yeah, and I don't know that it's talked about in real terms often enough.
Yeah.
I just in practical term, what does it sound like? What does it feel like? As soon as I started to consider trauma as different forms of energy and like my Hira last year, she said, look, she's like, it's a malfunctioning form of energy. She said, so take control of the energy. She said, receive it. Don't reject it anymore. Receive it and start to manipulate it, with your hands. And now you're in control of it. And now you can tell your mind, the part of your mind that just is stuck. Really, it's just energy that's just locked in one certain place. You're now giving that energy somewhere else to go.
Yeah.
She's like, and so I think for me, knowing that the energy was no longer being held hostage inside of me, that it was actually given away to flow through me and away from me. And that's when my huge breakthroughs really happened, was when I started to think about trauma and all of the, between the flesh and my head and all of that. I started to think about it a bit differently. And that's when my really big breakthroughs happened, when I kind of changed the way I thought about it.
With a lot, life throws a lot of stuff at you. And obviously we can't choose certain things that happen to us. And there's the saying, what doesn't kill you make you stronger. Do you think that applies to your situation? Do you think that you grew from that to an extent where you can say that you were much stronger, or I don't know, I can't think of another word, but now than you were before?
I think that I made a video about this. Yeah, I had to move recently and quite abruptly to get out of a mountain community before a huge storm hit. And I put together a move in 24 hours. And someone very close to me said, wow, you always manage to land on your feet. And I thought, you know what? My resilience, my strength that people have always commented on and looked as a positive attribute. I thought, don't congratulate me on my resilience, because my resilience is born out of violent sexual trauma. And no one should be as resilient as me. No. And so, I had a very successful career in film and television as an executive producer, because you could literally drop me in any country, anywhere in the world. I can figure it out. I can get anything done. I don't have a lot of fear. I don't, I'm strong. I'm resilient. And unfortunately, I think what I've realized is that resilience that people find commendable, or, wow, I wish I was as organized as you, or I wish I could just figure things out as quickly as you. Unfortunately, that resilience means that I'm not very approachable, and I'm not good at being vulnerable. And people never see me as someone who might need help, because I'm always figuring it out, right? I'm always able to survive anything that comes my way. I'll figure it out. And so lately, when I have asked for help, because I've had a really complicated couple of years when COVID came and everything else, I was uncomfortable asking for help. I was apologetic about it. And people didn't necessarily respond to my vulnerability very well, because I think they thought, well, you don't need help. You'll get through it. You always get through it. So I told this person, don't congratulate me on my resilience, and don't look at it like it's a great thing, because I'm just now figuring out how to ask for help and not be embarrassed by it. So yes, I can get through anything. I can survive anything. That's not a great way to live.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is your relationship like with your family? Do you, an extended family, is it, I'm sure it's complicated. That's probably a no-brainer, but how was that growing up? Were you able to talk about it at some point as still a young adult, or did it take you a long time, or have you? I'm sure that some of your family, if not most, probably knows by now about what happened to you, but did it take a long time before you were able to trust your family to even share that with them?
I didn't tell anybody in my family till I was about 19, 20. And the response was very disappointing. And it was a blip on the radar, and then it disappeared. And no one ever asked me about it ever again. And certainly my parents have never, ever been supportive of whatever healing journey I was on. I've never been asked about it.
Wow.
And my siblings have also never really stepped up into that role. So, I moved away from home. I went to DC, New York, Egypt, Kenya, different places. Oh, there's a cat now. Sorry.
We love cats.
Guess who just woke up? And I can say that my family today, after I've written this book, my sister read my book. The rest of my family, including my parents, have said they won't. And so I had to accept, and I continue to practice acceptance. This is probably the most complicated part of this, I think, is that my family is incredibly disappointing. And I am so lucky that I have developed my own family. I don't have children, and I've never been married, and I could talk about that all day. But I've created my own family over the years. And so in the disappointment I feel with my family, I'm consoled by my real family. And I think that it comes down to, I just don't trust them. Yeah. I don't I love my family. I'm learning how to create boundaries with them. But I fundamentally don't trust people who, when I said I was sexually abused by Grandpa, they all chose to rally around my grandmother. And my grandfather at that time was dead. And they never, ever took my side. And I cut off all communications with my grandmother and an aunt who said some really atrocious things to me. And I have always felt like that was their choice. And I thought, okay, well, you choose them instead of me. That's how it felt.
Yeah.
And if you're going to choose them instead of me, then how could I ever possibly trust you?
Yeah.
So I can go out and have fun with you. Like, I can go out and hang out with my siblings, and I can even see my mom, and I don't see my dad very often, and we can have a pretty good day. But the fundamental layer of trust that would normally, I think, sit between family members, that doesn't exist for me.
Understandably, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever turn to other coping mechanisms, like a lot of people with trauma turn to, substance abuse, alcohol, stuff like that? Did you ever turn to that too, or was that never on the table?
I coped by listening to Flight a lot, so I moved a lot. I could not get far enough away from the source of my abuse in terms of Southern California. I was a compulsive eater, and I still have issues with compulsive eating that I'm working on, and I'm actually doing pretty well with it now. And I was a compulsive spender, which is something else that I'm starting to get my head around and deal with. I never got into the drug, alcohol, that path, which I'm grateful for, because I know it happens a lot. But yeah, my symptoms came through with money and food. So
I can relate to the flight. I fled to Austria, so
yeah. And sometimes you just need it, right? You just
there's this like compulsion within you, like I need to just get, like as if getting away from where it happened is gonna fix all your problems, and I just need to distance myself as much as I possibly can. And for me, that was physical distance played such a huge role. It wasn't just distance myself from the people and the area that I was in, but just literally physical distance as far as I could possibly get away from it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a quote in my book that says you cannot heal in the same place where you were hurt. And I think that I never intended to be back in Southern California when I was living in Singapore when COVID started. And all of my contracts, everything, of course, came to a grinding halt. And I said to myself, I have to go home if I'm going to, I have to go home. There's just no way to hang out without work. But it was extremely complicated for me to come back to Southern California. And within a couple of months of being back, I was house sitting for a friend in Florida. I bought a car. I drove through 25 states. I was in flight mode on a whole other level. And I went from being someone who used to travel 400,000 miles a year. I traveled all over the world working. And now I was trapped in America and in Southern California. And it was, I almost didn't make it through. I'll just say it that way, because it was just, I felt trapped. And on top of that, I'm a Pisces. So the fact that my ocean got so small and I almost didn't make it through that. And it's, I think that if you reconcile your trauma and if you make peace with it, and part of that peace is not staying where you were traumatized, I don't think that that's an unhealthy way to live in. I just think that that's part of your healing, right? And it's like, I think people need to find their way through. And it's, if that means moving, then move.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah.
I mean, for me, moving here was probably the best decision I ever made. And I ended up getting married to this wonderful person here. And I ended up following my dream of what I actually want to do with my life in terms of my career. And I may not have done those things if I stayed where I was. The trauma kind of pushed me to really do the things, like live the life that I actually want to live.
Yeah. There's just listening to your instincts tell you don't need to be here anymore.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's really, there's a difference between flight and explore, or whatever, however you want to describe it. Yeah, and as long as you can make the differentiation between the two and go, you know what, this isn't flight. I'm not fleeing. I'm actually leaving. I think it's almost the difference between fleeing from the trauma or leaving to heal. Because
Absolutely. I think leaving to heal is much different than leaving the space where everything happened to ignore it.
Yes, I completely agree. And I'm good for you for listening to yourself.
You too.
Thank you. I'm still waiting to leave again, by the way. The expat in me is still very much well and alive, and I hope to be able to be an expat again very soon.
That I don't know if that's a question you can answer, but there are a lot of people out there who deal with similar situations where they have been sexually assaulted and have a hard time even talking about it or even, working through it. Is there something that you can tell them here through the podcast to just maybe that's something they can do to make it easier, or like a tip that starts the healing process?
Yeah. I think that for myself, I had to find someone who I could speak to where I knew I was in a safe environment. And that was a therapist's office. Because of laws and because of whatever, I knew that what I said in that room wasn't going to leave the room. Unless I chose for it to leave the room.
Yeah. So
I would encourage people who have sexual trauma in particular, and or just physical abuse trauma, those kinds of traumas, try to imagine yourself being in a safe place where you can say a simple sentence, and it could be as simple as, I've been abused. That's it. That's literally all you have to say. I didn't go into my therapist's office and say, when I was 5 years old, my grandfather used his hands to sexually assault me. I didn't say that. I was in my therapist's office and I said, I was abused by my grandpa. And we spent 3 years unpacking that sentence.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes that the hesitation or the fear of survivors to go into a therapeutic environment is that sometimes they might think, well, I have to say everything all at once. No, you don't. This is a layered, complicated journey that you control. If my therapist asks me a question that I don't want to answer, even today, I have therapy every couple of weeks. And if he wants to talk about something I'm not in the mood to discuss, I'll just say, we're not going to talk about that today. I control this. I pay for your hour. You know, so in therapy, you might actually enjoy the fact that you finally get control over your story for the first time ever in your life.
That's a great point.
Because you decide how much you share, when you share, and how you share it. And some people draw their way through it and share those drawings with the therapist. And so whatever you want to do, right? And I also try to tell my friends, because I've got girlfriends who are in their 30s, 50s, who are just now starting to address their trauma. They're very early into this. And I'll say, you know, it's talking about your experience is very difficult. I'm not going to minimize that. But it's never going to be, in my opinion, ever as horrific as the actual event. Because the event's over. So if you can control, just remember you control the narrative with the therapist. You control the pace of your healing. And just know that the conversations you're about to have will never be as violent and as devastating as what you've been through, what you survived. And you'll be okay. It'll be hard. It's not simple, but you'll be okay. You know.
That's
very,
like the most beautiful way that I've ever heard anybody talk about therapy.
I agree.
Just the whole control aspect of you being in control of what you say, and you're the one in control of exactly how it goes. I think that's a phenomenal way to look at therapy.
I agree. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Maybe talk a little bit more about your book.
Books.
Books. You have 2 books right now. What are they about, and who are they for? And we'll obviously link everything in the description.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. The first book is called It Won't Hurt None, a story of courage, healing, and a return to wholeness. And that's my memoir. It starts the book starts when I'm 47, and this medical trauma happens, and then it goes into all the way back to the beginning of the journey. And it's really meant to be an exploration of, well, this is what a life looks like that's lived life through trauma's lens. And I thought it was really important to just point out that when you're traumatized, it shows up, like I said earlier, in every aspect of your life. And then it also talks about the healing I went through to get to the place I am today. So that's the first book. And I'm quite proud of that book. It's at times a complicated, challenging read, because I'm obviously talking about trauma, but I don't sit with that throughout the entire book. That's not the intention of the book. The second book is called Hurt No More, and it's co-written by with my friend Aparna Ramakrishnan. And at the end of my memoir, when I had it finished, ready to publish, I thought, hey, you know what? I'm an overachiever, survivor, resilient person. I should write a second book. And so I did with my friend, because I felt like if I'm gonna drop this kind of truth bomb about my experience and about healing, I should probably leave behind a tool for other people to pick up and just start. And so the journal is intended, it's a simple journal. It's 10 steps to start your healing journey. And it's got some really useful guides at the back about how to talk to your bed partner, how to talk to your family, how to talk to your children, how to find a good doctor. So it's designed to be a tool for the very early stages of healing your trauma. We don't pretend to be psychologists or psychiatrists. We're just, my friend's got a master's in social work and I'm a survivor. So we put together this tool and we hope that it helps people get started.
That's great.
That's amazing. Yeah. I love when people share their stories firsthand, because a lot of people just need to hear things like that to not feel alone and to feel like, okay, I'm not the only one. I can do this. If other people can do this, if other people can push forward, I can do that as well. And I really loved it, because it helped me a lot too in my journey of going through all aspects of trauma and anxiety and depression. Just reading and hearing about things that people go through, similar things, helped me tremendously.
And I think, remember that trauma would like you to fail.
Yeah.
Trauma doesn't want you to get better, because your vibration, your cells have been reprogrammed into a traumatic vibration, and that's where trauma would like to sit.
Yeah.
And so it's trauma doesn't want you to get better. So just remember that any kind of voice in your head telling you that you're alone, that there's no one else like you, that's trauma doing its best to keep you at a certain vibration, a certain frame of mind, because it's comfortable there. It's really comfortable. And so it's not true. There's at least one other person in the world that can absolutely understand your story, and chances are there are millions. And so you're never ever alone. As much as you might feel it, you're not alone.
Yeah. Do you want to add something else? Otherwise, I think.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time and for your, first of all, amazing, tragic, but very amazing story, because you show that working through trauma in a not always healthy way, obviously, but in a forward pushing way can make a huge difference in your life, obviously, and also it shows that no matter what you're going through, I think there's always a way out, because going through something like you did in that early age can completely mess with you. And I think there are a lot of examples where they won't survive, or they will, be pushed into drug abuse or something like that. And your story shows that it makes a difference if you really work on it, if you look at it and if you see what it is and then face it. Thanks. It was very inspiring. Thank you so much.
And we're very glad that you're here, not
Thank
just
you.
Here on the podcast, but in general here, that you survived and that you continue to survive, and that you're part of this beautiful planet that we all live on. We're glad you're here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think you guys do this amazing thing, getting more voices out there. It's quite a gift that you've been given. So thank you for that. Thank you for sharing your gift.
Thanks
Thank you so much.
Being
Thank
part
you.
of it.
Yeah. Okay, that was it. Wow. See, I didn't start with wow.
Start.
I
did not start.
Look,
No, but she's really amazing.
We just talked about it after we stopped recording. The conversations that we have with literal strangers in that environment is so inspiring and just amazing. Yeah. Because you would never, in a million ways, talk about things like that when you just meet a person in a bar or a coffee place or something like that. So it's so that's the coolest aspect of doing the whole thing. Yeah. To get to talk to people who have inspiring stories, not always easy stories to tell, but getting to feel their energy and getting to see how they survived and how they pushed forward and how they managed to survive.
Yeah. I think it's also, these specific types of conversations are also very healing for me personally, just having gone through a similar trauma.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
You can, it always, I mean, we talked about it on the podcast. feeling like you're not alone is such a big aspect of healing and coming through trauma. And trauma, any type of trauma, but trauma like that, which I can only speak to that kind of trauma, it will forever be with you. It's never going to go away. And so, sometimes you have times where you don't think about it as often, but, or at least in my case, I can say that, but I do still think about it on at least a weekly basis. It pops into my head hey, this happened.
Sure.
But, or there's something that triggers it, like a sound or a song, or, something triggers those feelings to come back up and to resurface. And so to talk to somebody like that is so inspiring. And what she said about therapy, like, literally gave me goosebumps all over my body. Like, when she was talking about how you are in control, like, that's like the one thing that you can always trust and be certain of. When you go to therapy, you're in control of the conversation. And I think that that's such a powerful message about therapy. Like, that's so powerful.
I agree. And also just the perspective on therapy. What is therapy? What is it there for? And how can you use it? And I love that was the first thing she said.
Yeah.
That is literally the thing that will help you in so many ways. Yeah.
Well, especially having so many trust issues after, I mean, especially in her situation, but I mean, I also had a lot of trust issues after, even though it was with people that I knew, that my experience was with people I knew, but it still gave me trust issues in relationships. I mean, we talked about that a little bit, and it gave me trust issues in a lot of other aspects of my life. And it took me a really long time to connect the two, because I was like, why would that give me trust issues? Like, for me, that those two things didn't correlate. But being able to recognize that was a really big thing, and in terms of healing, and just being able to, like, have an environment where it's like, you can trust this person because by law they can't share anything. So it's not necessarily about, like, trying to find someone that you can trust. It's just knowing, hey, if I go to this place, I can at least trust the fact that this information will not be shared. And so that alone kind of gives you this sense of power that maybe you felt like was taken away from you.
I agree. And also, I mean, that's what I preach always about therapy, is just the outside perspective.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's so healing to hear someone talk from a completely different perspective.
Yeah.
Obviously, you want that person to be sympathetic and then understand you, but just getting this outside perspective, and in a lot of ways, that's something a lot of people need to hear.
Yeah.
A lot, because they are so focused on their ways and they don't see maybe the things that they do, or maybe the things that they shouldn't do. Yeah.
Or because they just don't know you personally. It's a completely unbiased perspective.
I again, thanks again for Rebecca for being here, for being so open. And again, if you like what you hear,
before you give your little spiel, I just want to say, if you're someone out there who is suffering from trauma of any kind, and you're struggling with your mental health, and you're looking for help, or you're in more of an emergency state where you need someone, we will link some hotlines that you can call, so suicide hotlines, and just in general hotlines for emergency situations where I need to talk to somebody. We will link all of that for Austria and for the US in the description, and just know that you're not alone, and that my dad always says you are loved, you are needed, and you matter, and it's really true. So
that's true. Yeah. If you like what you hear, please consider subscribing, following the podcast, rating the podcast, reviewing the podcast. And if you want to support us in a different way, you can head over to our Patreon, where Joe is still waiting for another Patreon. Hey, Joe. Thanks, Joe. And yeah, that's it. Until next week.
Watch out for deer.